sort of sort this position out. I suppose the queues will be there for several months more, but I would, now the floor is open for any questions. If you can, please identify yourself when you answer the question. But before I move to a question from the audience.
One immediate response, I hope queues will be lower.
Yeah.
Less,
I think the first thing from what you said, and first thing what a lot of people would want to know is there a timeline that you can place as to when the queues will end?
Yeah, that depends. I mean, this is because we are in an uncertain situation. So a lot of things I can say, if that happens, this will happen. So, because a lot of things are uncertain. For example, now I can say for next couple of weeks, we have sufficient foreign exchange to support at least essential imports, and queues probably will be less. But beyond, say, a couple of weeks, and we are planning some other things to improve the situation next couple of weeks so that we can continue that improvement going forward. So subject to that, that's why I'm hopeful that we at least should be able to manage this situation and at least some improvement on a gradual basis. But difficult to tell anyone that this will be over in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and at least only expectation I can give you is that if we are able to reach an agreement with the IMF within about 2-3 months, obviously situation will be certainly much better than what we see now.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take any question from the audience.
Governor, there is a 1.5 billion Chinese swap agreement, which you told is not able to use despite we have a huge import from China. What actually is the condition on the swap that we are not being able to use, and when can we expect to use that 1.5 billion swap from China? That's question number one. Other thing is, what is the status of negotiation with IMF currently, and how much of fund do you expect from the IMF? Earlier the finance minister said he's expecting 10 billion, and some said 4 billion. What is your expectation?
Yeah, on the Chinese swap, I think I have already made that comment when this was signed. I think probably last year. There is a condition where that I think we have drawn down the amount into our resource, but we cannot utilize that unless we have, one of the conditions that at least we need to have 3 months of import coverage in our resource, or we need to have 12 months of debt service payments with our resource. Those are the 2 conditions that we have in that agreement. So none of the conditions cannot be met. So as a result, that money cannot be used. That's one thing that I have already, I think, mentioned earlier. Second one, your question on the how much we expect, that's too early to tell. As I mentioned earlier, what we are basically trying to do here is to, based on overall policy package from monetary policy, balance of exchange rate policy, and as well as the fiscal policy, that's the most important part, government revenue expenditure, the primary surpluses. On that basis, we work out what is the external financing requirement of the country for next, say, 3 years. We estimate that. And once you estimate that, then IMF will say, okay, IMF has certain facilities. For example, our external fund facility, usually under normal circumstances, a member country is eligible up to 400% of quota on the basis of our quota with the IMF, which is about $3 billion. That is up to 400% of quota. Under exceptional circumstances, that can go up to 600% of quota. That means another 1.5 billion. So it's right now we are at the beginning of the IMF negotiations. and we have to estimate what is external financing requirement based on the debt relief, based on fiscal adjustment. Then only one can decide what is the exact amount of financing gap. Only on that basis, IMF will tell us, okay, we will give you this amount, World Bank will give you this amount, ADB will give you this amount, and you have to raise balance from some other sources. That's why I'm not in a position to give you exact numbers on that basis. The other question, at what stage the IMF discussion, we started this technical level negotiations when we were in Washington during the spring meetings, and that continued on virtual basis and last 2 weeks. And today and tomorrow, I think tomorrow is the last day of the formal technical meetings that we are having with the IMF staff. And today also at 7 o'clock I have virtual meeting that I have to attend there. So that process is going on. And next step for the IMF staff is we have shared with them what our intentions in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of certain policies. And on that basis, they will look at what they call debt sustainability analysis, DSA. Then that information will be used for us to negotiate with the creditors in the debt restructuring process. That is where we are right now. So that will happen. That process will start from next week onwards. Right now we are in a technical negotiation mode, but we are not. So we have not still reached overall package in terms of policies and reforms. That will happen down the line, probably in about another 6 to 8 weeks, hopefully.
I actually have two questions. The first one is that we are in the newspaper industry. We are an essential industry, services. We are finding it very difficult to get newsprint. Is there anything that the central bank can do about it? That's the first one. Second one is, I don't see a coherent roadmap to bring in dollars. We are talking about restructuring, saving, borrowing, but what about industries like tea, which can bring in dollars, tourism which can bring in dollars, IT which can bring in dollars? We don't seem to be giving it that importance. Would you have any comments on that?
Newspaper. So my question is that what is the priority at this point? Whether you need to print newspapers and distribute, or whether we need people outside waiting for gas and petrol for them to give that stuff. These are the things that we have to make choices. So I think, and everyone, that's obvious, at this point of time, what is the priority out of available foreign exchange available to the country? First priority is to support all these things, otherwise you won't even have people reading newspapers if they are still waiting in the queues. But once we supply that, there are a lot of other essential as well. I mean, we recognize a lot of things are needed, but on that basis, especially if you look at now the papers for examination, that I think probably we have been able to provide that. That's why exams are going on. So whether we need to allocate papers for printing exams, or we need to allocate papers for your printing. So I mean, I certainly recognize is an important one. But given the choices, I think we have to make choices. Yeah, obviously, I think I hope still there are sufficient papers to print newspapers for you to do that business. That's also important, especially media. Now there are a lot of other ways of media as well. I think there's a lot of people are using several other things. And on the other question on the foreign exchange, that's why I mentioned, when I mentioned the foreign exchange earning sectors, that includes the export of goods, export of services, tourism, IT, port services, all these things. And if you look at right now, who has the incentives? It's only export industry right now. Because, if any company who would be able to export on net basis, I mean, there's a good business right now. There's already incentive, but problem right now is that with all this disruption, shortages, and all these things, that there could be disturbances. But we have to make sure at this point is to make sure all these foreign exchange earning sectors can smooth operately without any disturbances. At least we get certain flow of foreign exchange for us to survive at this point. And once we come out of the survival mode, then obviously we can promote tourism, we can promote a lot of other agencies. There can be policies to all this. That's what we call medium to long-term structural reforms. And one important mistake that we have been doing, this country, as I mentioned earlier, we have never been an export-oriented economy. We have always been an import-dependent economy. So we have to convert this into an import-dependent economy to an export-oriented economy. It's not only the export of goods, export of services, export of, getting remittance, all these things are areas that are quite right. So that this has to be the kind of a change in the structure of the country, so that country should be able to earn more foreign exchange than what we spend. So that's where historically we have been a lot of policies like, import protection, all the taxes, tariffs, all these lot of technicals we can highlight why we are in this situation compared to some other countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, were at the same stage about 10 years ago like us, but they are completely moving in a different direction. We are moving in the other direction. So these are the all kind of policy mistakes that from time to time. I don't want to blame any kind of the regime or this. This is successive governments have been promoting more like domestic oriented industries, and that can't be a model that country like small economy like us can sustain. So that has to be changed sooner or later. Otherwise we will be, even if we come out of this crisis, if we don't change that mindset, then if we don't structure economy towards more export oriented, we will be again having a repeating balance of payment crisis. That's why from time to time, that's the reason why Sri Lanka and also Pakistan we had gone to IMF for 16 times in the past. Why we are going to IMF? Because we are facing a balance of payment difficulties. Why that is the case? Because we are not earning sufficient foreign exchange to meet our day-to-day expenditure for us to import. So that repeat cycle will continue unless we change it. So this is time, crisis is the best opportunity to restructure, reorient the economic activity towards foreign exchange earning capacity will have to be increased.
So about the support that we might be able to get from G7, because last week I believe they met in Germany and they have promised us to be able to help, and those are powerful countries. I hope you will be following up with that. My second question short is, I'm given to understand that the IMF started its negotiations in Sri Lanka way back on the 9th of March, on the 9th of May, and they're due to finish tomorrow or day after. I just wanted to know why we didn't have until now, or maybe soon, economic and financial advisors to support our cause before the IMF and its negotiations. Thank you.
I think I already alluded to these two questions. Thank you for for raising that. One is we are basically complete the first round of discussion with the IMF day after tomorrow, starting from 9th of May, but it will have to continue going forward until we reach what I call staff level agreement. That will happen. And on the financial and debt advisors also, because there's a process for we have the national level procurement guidelines. If you want to, appoint these international agencies as legal and financial advisors, there is a process to follow. In fact, we have been able to tighten the procedures, still following open and transparent process to call for RFPs and they evaluate on the certain guidelines in open transparent process and ensure that we have a proper process, and then we submit our proposals to the Ministers of Cabinet. So I also part of the steering committee appointed by the Cabinet to follow that process. We have completed that process. Obviously there was some delay because of the last 2 weeks some of the events, and also we have been able to even during the due process we took some time to negotiate and bring down the financial costs because these are expensive exercises. We are trying to get the best deal for the country, and as a result now we have finalized and submitted that proposal to the Cabinet. Today I am not sure whether the Cabinet meeting was held. If that was held, probably that decision would have been taken to appoint the advisors. And the D7 statement obviously is a very welcome statement. But G7 countries have in principle expressed their support for debt restructuring, and also I think other monetary agencies. That's a very welcome statement, hoping that their support will be materialized going forward. But if you look at from where the financial support can be obtained, basically it's mainly the IMF and other multilateral agencies are the key agencies, those who can provide us with financial support. And obviously those countries are members of the IMF and World Bank, so through that they will give us some support.
Good evening, Doctor. I would like to ask one question regarding the state banks. Regarding the state banks and the private banks, because time to time there are a lot of stories coming on the websites and the social media saying some banks are bankrupt, and there are a lot of stories. But the individual who are in the savings, they are a little bit worried about that. Now, what is the stand of that?
Obviously, we all understand, we recognize there is a foreign exchange liquidity crisis right now. That balance of payment crisis faced by the country, and as a result, that share of this shortage is basically spread across the all stakeholders. For the central bank, we don't have reserves. Then commercial banks also facing foreign currency liquidity issues, second. And then outside the commercial banks, even importers, exporters, as I said, the newspaper industry facing foreign currency liquidity shortages. And everyone shares, even the people in the queues are, why they are in the queue, because there is foreign currency liquidity shortages. So banks are facing that, all countries facing that, so everyone has their share of liquidity issue, foreign currency liquidity issue. But when it comes to what is important here to understand is the Sri Lankan, our banking system, while recognizing there is a foreign currency liquidity issue, but in terms of rupee liquidity, that is where the people are depositing their deposits in rupees largely, and what we have to ensure their deposits in the banking system is protected and secured. As a regulator, we can give that assurance to central bank. There is rupee liquidity shortages on some banks, obviously, and some other banks have surpluses. But under the central banking act, like any other country, any central bank role is to provide domestic currency liquidity when there is liquidity shortages in the domestic banking system. We have sufficient provisions in the Monetary Law Act to provide the liquidity on daily basis, weekly basis, or monthly basis, even longer term basis, if there is a rupee liquidity. This is where my message is that we are ready to stand, ready to help, support our banking system, even non-banking system. If they need liquidity, central bank has provisions. Central bank can provide the rupee liquidity, and there's basically we can protect the deposits of the people in the banking system. That I can assure you. But in terms of foreign currency, obviously, that's where we are doing all these things to bring in the field external financing so that once we get that money or foreign exchange, that situation also will be is to a great extent depending on how much we are going to get. So if we get $1 billion of facility, then we can provide part of that to the banking system. Then that can address the foreign currency liquid situation in the banking system. That will trickle down to the supply side, logistics supply issues in imported items. So that is where the issue is. Not the rupee side of the, I don't see any risk in the banking sector. Banks are, I think one thing I have to mention, the banks obviously, when economy is going a contraction period, banks also will have their share of lower capital. They have to use some of the capitals, that preserved for this kind of situation. For example, now if you look at the capital level of our banks, still they are above the minimum capital requirements. And there's also what they call the capital buffers that can be used in this kind of situation. Yesterday, Monetary Board, we have given them some relief for them to use those capital buffers in this kind of situation, so that is some relief, so the banks can use whatever good times they build up these capital buffers, and bad times they can use that capital to smooth out their liquidity issues, so their operation. That we are in the process of giving that relief. In addition, what I mentioned, even if there's a liquidity issue, there are several other instruments, what they call, any central bank has what they call lender of last resort. That is where if there's a bank facing big liquidity crisis or issue, then we have instruments to deal with that. But that's on the liquidity, rupee liquidity side.
මංගාව ප්‍රශ්න තුනක් තියෙනවා. පළවෙනි එක තමයි මේ IMF එක සාකච්ඡාව යනකොට දැනටමත් මේ මුදල් ඇමති කෙනෙක් පත් කරලා නැහැ. ඒ හින්දා මේක මේ ඔබතුමාලගේ IMF සමග සාකච්ඡාවට බලපානවද නැද්ද කියලා එකක්. දෙවෙනි ප්‍රශ්නය තමයි මේ ඒ කියන්නේ ඔබතුමාලා මේ කිව්වා විදේශ රටවල් වලින් ණය ගන්නවා ඒත් එකම අපි මේ ෆිනෑන්ෂියල් ඇසිස්ටන්ස් එහෙම ගන්නවා මේක අපිට මේ ෂෝට් ටර්ම් එකකින් සොලියුෂන් එකක් දෙන්න පුළුවන් ඒත් මේකේ මේ ක්‍රයිසිස් එකේ ඉඳලා අපි එළියට එන්නට ලොන්ග් ටර්ම් ප්ලෑන්ස් ඔබතුමාලගෙන් මොනවද තියෙන්නේ කියලා දැනගන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා තුන්වෙනි ප්‍රශ්නය තමයි මේ කැබිනට් එකට දාන්නට බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන ප්‍රොපෝසල්ස් ටික දැනගන්න පුළුවන්ද කියලා ඒත් එකම ඔයාගෙන් මට රික්වෙස්ට් එකක් තියෙනවා මේක මේ අවශ්‍ය බෙහෙත් ටිකත් මේ තෙල් එකත් නැති නිසා මේ පොඩි දරුවලා ගොඩක් මිය ගිහිල්ලා මේ සිද්ධිය ගිය සතියේ වාර්තා වෙලා තියෙනවා ඒ හින්දා එයාලගේ අනාගතය වෙනුවෙන් ඔබතුමාලට ගත හැකි ක්‍රියාමාර්ග මේ ටක් ගාලා ගන්න කියලා මං අහනවා thank you
මුලින්ම මම හිතන්නේ ඇහුවේ පොඩ මතක ගන්න පුළුවන්ද ඉස්සර 1 2 3 4 කියලා අහපු අතර
පළවෙනි ප්‍රශ්නය තමයි මේ දැනටමත් මේ මුදල් අමාත්‍ය කෙනෙක් නැහැ.
රයිට් ඕකේ.
ඒක මේ බලපානවද කියලා අලුත් සාකච්ඡාවට.
ඒක වැදගත්. මුදල් අමාත්‍ය කෙනෙක් අත් වශයෙන් මේ අවස්ථාවේදී අපේ කරන ජාත්‍යන්තර මුදල් සමග සාකච්ඡාවලදී මුදල් අමාත්‍යවරයෙක් අවශ්‍යම නැහැ. හේතුව මේ අපි කියන්නේ ටෙක්නිකල් ලෙවල් නෙගෝසියේෂන්ස් තමයි දැන් යන්නේ. එතකොට දැන් සෙක්‍රටරි ට්‍රෙෂරි ඉන්නවා එතකොට ගවර්නර් සෙන්ට්‍රල් බැංක් ඉන්නවා අපි දෙන්න තමයි මේක දැනට ටෙක්නිකල් ලෙවල් ඒවා ලීඩ් කරන්නේ දැන් ෆිස්කල් පොලිසි පැත්තෙන් සෙක්‍රටරි ට්‍රෙෂරි මොනිටරි පොලිසි and එක්ස්චේන්ජ් රේට් පොලිසි පෙරස්තෝපේ පැත්තේ මම තමයි ඒව සාකච්ඡා මෙහෙවන්නේ එතකොට අපිට ඒක කරගෙන යන්න පුළුවන් හැබැයි ඒක අවස්ථාවක් වෙනවා මේ ඒ රටේ විශේෂයෙන් ෆිස්කල් පොලිසි ගැන තීරණය කරනකොට ඒ තීරණය ගන්න තියෙන්නේ මහ බැංකුව පැත්තෙන් ගත්තොත් the monetary policy කියන central bank is an independent agency. Central bank can make central bank own decision on in monetary policy. ඒක ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. නමුත් fiscal policy කියන්නේ ඒක රජයේ මූල්‍ය ප්‍රතිපත්තිය කියන එක බලතලයේ තියෙන රටේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට. සහ මුදල් ඇමතිවරයා හරහා කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට සහ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට. එතකොට යම්කිසි ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම සහ ඒක ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම සහ ඒ සඳහා යම්කිසි එකඟත්වයක් දෙන්න ඕන රටේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව මුදල් ඇමති කෙනෙක් පත් වෙලා එයා කැබිනට් එකට මේක ඉදිරිපත් කරලා එතනින් පාර්ලිමේන්තුව ඉදිරිපත් කළා තමයි රටේ ෆිස්කල් පොලිසි එක කරන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට ඒ සඳහා යම්කිසි දැනට ඒක ප්‍රශ්නයක් නොවුනත් ඉදිරියට යනකොට මුදල් ඇමති කෙනෙක් ඉන්නවනම් ඒකට ඉන්නම අවශ්‍ය වෙනවා අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම. මොකද මුදල් ඇමතිගේ තමයි වගකීම. එහෙම නැත්නම් මුදල් ඇමතිකම කවුරු හරි කෙනෙක් අගමැතිතුමා හරි ජනාධිපතිතුමා හරි කෙනෙක් යටතට ඒක එන්න ඕන. එහෙම නැත්නම් කවුරු හරි කෙනෙක් මුදල් ඇමති කියලා පුද්ගලයෙක් පත් වෙනවා තිබුණොත් හොඳයි. ඒක දෙවෙනි කාරණේ. අපේ රට දැන් ගොඩක් කල ඉතිහාසයේ ඉඳලාම හැමදාම අපි විදේශ විනිමය උපනයනට වැඩිය විදේශ විනිමය විදං කරන රටක් බවට තමයි පත් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒක නිසා ඒ විදිහට මේක දිගටම යන්න පුළුවන් ක්‍රමයක් නැහැ. ඒකට දිගු කාලීන විසඳුම වෙන්නේ අපේ රටක් වශයෙන් ගත්තාම විදේශ විනිමය උපයන රටක් බවට පත් වෙන්න ඕන අපි විදේශ විනිමය විදං කරනවට වඩා. ඒතර ඒ ක්‍රමවේදය තුළින් තමයි අපි බලුවොත් ගොඩක් රටවල් දිනුලා තියන්නේ. අපි දැන් දුප්පත් රටවල් වගේ තිබිච්ච වල වියට්නාමයේ බංග්ලාදේශ වුණත් දැන් විශාල වශයෙන් විදේශ විනිමය වියදම්මට වැඩි උපයන රටවල් බවට පත් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒතකොට ඒවා ස්ථාවරයි ඉදිරියට යනකොට. කෙටි කාලීනව අඩු වැඩි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් දිග් කාලීනව ගත්තාම අර නැති කාලයක ණය අරගෙන ඒක යම් කිසි ආකාරයක මැනේජ් කරන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් ඒක දීර්ඝ කාලීනව අපි වගේ අවුරුදු 70ක් තිස්සේ හැමදාම ණය ගෙනල්ල විතරක් දිනුවෙත් රටක් විදියට ක්‍රියාත්මක නම අර ඒක නිසා තමයි අර මැදිහා දීර්ඝ කාලීන ප්‍රධානම ප්‍රතිපත්තක් වෙන්න රටේ විදේශ විනිමය උපයන්න තියෙන හැකියාව වැඩි කරලා ඒ අනුව තමයි රටේ ජනතාවකට රැකියාව සැපයීම මුදල් ඉපීමට පුළුවන් ක්‍රියාමාර්ග වැඩි වෙන්න ඕන ඒ ආකාරයෙන්. අර මෙඩිසින් වල ෆාමසිටිකල්ස් වලට මම හිතන්නේ දැනටම භෞතිකාල තිබුණ තමයි හිගයක්. නමුත් දැන් අර ඉන්දියන් ලයින් ඔෆ් ක්‍රෙඩිට් එකේ නෝ වර්ල්ඩ් බැංක් ADB දෙකෙන්ම සෑහෙන මුදල් ප්‍රමාණයක් වෙන් කළ තියෙනවා ෆාමසිටිකල්ස් වලට. ඊට අමතරව අපිත් ඒවා අවශ්‍ය වුණාම ප්‍රයොරිටි එක දීලා ඒවා දෙනවා. ඒ one of the essential items pharmaceuticals. ඉතින් සමහර රටවල් සහ ওই අපිට උදව් කරන ඉදිරියට වෙලා බොහෝලාට ඒවට උදව් කරනවා. මම හිතන්නේ ඉදිරියට යනකොට pharmaceuticals වලට ලොකු ප්‍රමාණයක් අවශ්‍ය වෙන ප්‍රමාණය මම හිතන්නේ මැනේජ් කරගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි ඉදිරි කාලය තුළ ඉදිරියට යනකොට මේ අවශ්‍යතාවලට.
I think the question for the benefit of others was will the absence of the finance minister be an impediment? So his response was that, I mean, this would not at the moment. And the other critical question was also about the medicines and the shortage, which the governor said that we should be able to resolve that very soon. The next question.
Even the Prime Minister has stated that in the future we might have a severe shortage of food in Sri Lanka, and we do not have fertilizer also at the moment. So there is the cultivation for the next crop is going to reduce drastically. So how is the country going to finance the importation of food into the country in the next few months? And I have two more questions. And the other question is, how important is things like industrialization, especially manufacturing of electronics, to provide an export development economy? And also now people save in financial banks, in commercial banks, and now the commercial banks have increased their interest rates, but the increase in inflation is much larger than the increase in the inflation rate. So are people better off not putting their money in banks or investing it in something like a land or something like that?
This, I think monetary policy stance is based on not on the basis of headline inflation. So inflation right now is just 30%. That does not mean we have to raise interest rates to about 30% to address this situation. You need to look at what we call underlying inflation, which is taking off one-off adjustments as a result of the currency depreciation, as a result of one-off reforms like increasing petroleum prices, all these things have one-off impact on the inflation. Obviously, monetary policy cannot deal with this kind of situation. What we are looking at is future inflation expectations and also the underlying inflation. As a result, we think we have tightened monetary policies sufficiently to address that situation going forward. This is one of the reasons why soon after I took the office, historically highest rate hike, as you know, 700 basis points, never ever happened in this country. We tightened. That was a proactive interest rate policy that we have raised it. Unfortunately, some of the market rates basically have shot up more than what we raised. That we are trying to address that because these interest rates are too high. That won't help even the government, even the private sector, some of the basic activities. So that's the one question. And second one, your industrialization, obviously, I mean, what I mentioned broadly, any sector that can earn foreign exchange, it could be manufacturing, it could be industry, it could be services, it could be remittances. That depends on the structure of the economy. If we think there is a potential for industries and manufacturing, obviously that's fine. I mean, I don't think anyone can say we should promote only the industries, only the manufacturing, forget about it. This all depending on a modern dynamic economy. Opportunities are, varying from time to time. If you look at it, this is one of the problems that in even Sri Lankan economy is that diversification of exports has not happened for a long period. If you look at the key major export sectors, only tea, rubber and garments for a long period. But some countries, those have developed faster and those who have been able to earn more foreign exchange have been able to diversify their sources of export industries, beginning from low, cheap labor industries and then gradually moving up the ladder on more sophisticated technological industries and more into services. Once economy per capita income grows up, that dynamics will have to happen over a period of time. So that is where manufacturing industry also will have a role to play. Probably in our country, because we don't have a cheap labor, it has to be a high-end manufacturing and industries that will have. Not that low. We don't have a luxury of cheap labor in this country because wages have gone up. We are not that competitive. This is why, if you can see, even garment industry now gradually moving into high-end, and also some are moving outside the country, countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam. That process will happen. Some new industries will come up. If you look at the food imports, I mean, obviously there is a lower production in the agriculture sector because of the shortage in fertilizer last season. And now the Indian line of India has agreed to allocate, provide for fertilizer going forward. I think they're trying to bring that fertilizer supply for the next season. Hopefully, if that happens, probably government will be able to provide that fertilizer supply for the agriculture. That's quite important for us to increase the production. And what Prime Minister said, I think there's a globally, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, some of the production there is not happening as much as that used to happen. As a result, there is some shortages in globally, and as a result, prices have gone up. Now, this is where we are looking at. I mean, if you look at the total import requirement, import requirement food is not that high. For example, when I looked at because of the open account ban, a lot of people say that there will be shortages in imported food items like rice or something. But when you look at the numbers, monthly requirement for essential food items is about $75 million per month, compared to $500 million for petroleum imports. So if we can find, or prioritize who allocate this amount of money for food imports, even with shortages, I think we should be able to manage. In the short term, obviously, going forward, this country has a capacity to produce more agriculture production if the fertilizer is available. I think that is more of a short-term issue. Once the government has been able to provide the fertilizer sufficiently, I think I'm sure our agriculture sector can produce sufficient, at least some of the key commodities that is required for the country to be self-sufficient in certain items.
3 questions. The first one is, to whom did we default last week, the sovereign bond payment, and what was the money borrowed for, and by whom? The second question is, isn't there a need for transparency in terms of how much money has been borrowed and how much by whom, and the interest rate, in terms of are these figures available for public consumption? And the final one is a bit of an interesting one. The Prime Minister said recently that the books are cooked. Who have done the cooking?
That last question, I think I have no comments. You have to ask the Prime Minister who are the cookers or chefs. But the other question, to whom we have defaulted, as I mentioned earlier, 12th of April, we have announced from that day onwards, we will not be servicing all commercial debt, all Paris Club and non-Paris Club. So that is what we call preemptive default. So there are public information to whom we have to say $6 billion, how much owe to ISB holders, how much that we have to pay to other creditors. Based on that information, anyone can find out to whom we have not paid the amount. So that is public information. I don't think I should, I can't remember exact numbers. I think that is publicly available information.
Other one, what was? The other one was about last week's, there was a default. No?
That's why I said this default is basically, we announced that on 12th of April, we will not be making payments to all these 3 categories.
Yeah, so the other question, I think you also answered, that is, whom have we borrowed this money from? If there are someone, the names or the institutions or that kind of information.
To me, I'm not sure what the question is that. So, if you ask a question from whom government has borrowed, government has been borrowing from domestic market to treasury bills and bonds from all the local people, and others, since we announced this, the standstill, basically we are not borrowing. Only line of credit we are getting right now is from Indian line of credit. That's $1 billion plus another 500 or 1 billion other petroleum facility. So those are bit of a longer term credit facilities. I think terms and conditions, I'm sure those will be published by the Treasury.
Yeah. Okay, we can take 2 more questions before we wind up. Asanta, why not to ask? You have the mic, so go ahead.
This is regarding the the provision for services. And Governor several times mentioned the provision for services, that is like the professional services. Now this last circular issued by Cabral, or the former governor, that you have to bring into Sri Lanka, so that is no problem. Even previously as professionals, we used to bring in all our foreign currency for the services rendered outside Sri Lanka. We used to bring into our NRC accounts and keep it in NRC accounts in dollars. And then as and when we collect about 10,000, 20,000, we make it a fixed deposit. So it's in dollars. But since that circular, we are supposed to forcefully convert on the 7th of the next month, right? 2 rupees. Now we all know that the rupee is losing value and the dollar is gaining value. So Of course, we need the foreign currency. There's no doubt about that. We need foreign currency. But my request, not a request, just to point out, if you, say that this money, this foreign currency, if you put it into a fixed deposit, say for 1 year, so that 1 year the money stays with the banks. You know, you can't withdraw. So as the professionals, what we used to do was keep that as security. Keep that, $10,000 as security, and bank used to give now 90% on that. Now, we can draw on interest. So that was completely stopped by Cabral, or my friend Cabral. He's my friend, right? So, but the thing is, so don't you think the people can, now especially the export of, for IT, there's a lot of money. So they keep the money in Singapore, Dubai or somewhere, and they bring the money only what is required for the local expenses. Just, but I'm saying that that money should be kept in foreign, in US dollars or foreign currency, but put in at least minimum 1 year fixed deposit, so that the liquidity side is also cleared, and from this side your local requirement is also cleared. Now we have to convert by force to rupees, and to 1 month later that value drops down by 33% according to today's statistics. Thank you.
So my first comment is that it's your choice. If you keep dollars in your account as you suggest, you will be losing your value in rupees going forward. That's I can assure you. Because there's an overshooting situation. Now currency is becoming stable and now gradually appreciating. That will continue. That's up to you, all professionals. If they are professionals, they can make the choice there. And the other argument, say, if we, at this point of time, now we are basically imposing export of goods. We are exporters, we have imposed this repatriation requirement as well as surrender requirement. They are also only foreign exchange. And if I go by your argument, what is the difference between exporter of goods and exporter of service for the country? Exporting using human resource or exporting using our resources, export and earn that foreign exchange, and this is the time this money is best bringing this country and convert and provide that money to support essential imports. That is the basis, a rationale why this has been introduced. So I have no disagreement with the principle, but also at the same time I understand there's a tendency in the market, if they believe this currency is going to depreciate further, obviously rational kind of a response on any agent, okay, why don't I keep that money without converting, that's natural, that we understand. And the fact that export of services cannot be traced for us to implement 100% conversion, that is not practical. This is why I express that view, that because that is not practical for us to monitor 100% repatriation or conversion of exports, why don't we relax? As you said, some of the professionals are keeping that money abroad. I don't see them as professionals, that's unprofessional. Because at this time, if they think this money I'm not going to bring as a professional to this country by providing his services somewhere, I don't know, you can classify them as a professional or unprofessional. To me, that is not a professional thing to do. But because we understand the rationale for not bringing that money, I certainly agree, and I indicated that we will relax that. But here the situation is that now, if you look at the numbers for, as I mentioned even earlier press conference, we have seen that actually there are good professionals, not all, good professionals who are basically bringing that money and converting at least $300 million per month. For the last couple of months, we have been monitoring these numbers. So I appreciate those professionals. They are real professionals. They're bringing and converting this money, at least repatriation, $300 million. So why I wouldn't like to take the risk, if I remove that requirement of repatriation and conversion, those professionals become unprofessional and not bringing at all, So this is why I think, certainly I agree, we will, once the situation is eased, these are the things, one by one we will be relaxing. At least give incentive for people like yours to make your choices. It's up to you to keep in dollars. I don't like the proposal that you should keep that one year fixed deposit by force. That is even bad as forced conversion. Same thing, it's your choice. You look at the overall economic situation, make your decision. If you think currency is depreciating, probably you will keep. If you think currency appreciating, you will have a tendency to convert and get that money. If you look at right now, what I can tell you is that now currency is stable and gradually appreciating, and if you convert it into rupees, not only you get the current value for the dollar, but also you have opportunity to invest that rupees and earn almost 20% in interest. Opportunity cost of keeping that money is not a financial incentive right now. So that's still I don't want to force that. I am only giving you the facts and the trends so people can make choices. So if longer, in my view, longer the holding in dollars, longer these people might be losing their financial value. So that's only I can tell you.
Thank you, Governor. We have time only for 2 more questions before we wind up.
Hello, Governor. I'd like to understand to what extent the debt-to-nature swaps have been part of those negotiations, as well as if climate instruments are part of the policies and reforms. Thank you.
As far as I'm not aware of the debt-related nature swaps thing. I don't think I'm not aware of that kind of negotiations going on.
We have time for 1 more question. Asantha, you want to ask? Can we have a mic here, please?
Governor, according to this debt suspension policy, some public sector agencies are also it was included. Can you just give us an overview of what are those agencies, and also I think multilateral agencies you have to pay. So in the next like 12 months, how much do we have to pay to the multilaterals out of the 7 billion or whatever in the next 12 months, and how much is the affected debt? And if there are any public sector agencies, what are the ones that are affected?
The sales for this year, I look at the number, I can't remember the whole year, is we are not going to pay about $2.3 billion from, I think, next 6 months for the external creditors, all commercial, bilateral and Paris Club. And what we have to pay, the balance period is about 900 million for multilateral agencies. But who would be affected, state or not, I can't remember. There also, I think we have published the Q&A clearly. It mentioned in the statement who is included, who is not excluded is there. Because I don't want to make that, because of this is a sensitive thing. If I make a statement, if that could be incorrect, that's not good, because please look at the statement and Q&A. We clearly have indicated what is excluded, what is included. It's there actually. Because I can't remember that accurately, I don't want to make that statement here. So that's basically subject to negotiation. It's not right for me to make a incorrect statement here in public.
A final question, Mr.
Governor, you were stressing on preemptive default, but after the 18th we have gone into a hard default. How bad is that situation, and going forward, what are the implications?
No, when we announced preemptive default, that was obvious. This is only a technical term. When we announced that we are not going to make that payment, obviously there are certain agreements which say you give a 1 month period if you want to pay. But when we make the announcement on 12th of April, that was obvious and very clear. We are not going to make that payment. But on technical terms, there is a definition that was called preemptive default, and after 1 month, this concession period, this grace period is over, they define as a default. I mean, this is not something unexpected, it's not anything surprise, that was something expected, but because of the technicality, there is a rating classification. If we are in preemptive default, it's a 1 rating category, there is a 1 notch downgrade because of the, after 1 month, grace period is over, still we haven't made that payment. Obviously, we are not going to make that payment. It was something not unexpected.
Before we wind up, I have a final question sent by me. On the 9th of May, we had some violent clashes in Colombo. What impact does this kind of political instability have on IMF talks?
No, I don't think that has any immediate impact on IMF, because we continue that discussion throughout the period as planned. There was no delay in that process. But what I mentioned earlier, there basically was a delay in appointing financial and legal advisors as a result of there was no proper cabinet, and there was some delay in that. Going forward, also what I mentioned earlier, we need to have a finance minister to be able to sign up and give commitments on the policies going forward. But this thing obviously has some disruptions in terms of our ability to continue raise bridging financing. There's a disruption or kind of things we were planning to do during that period was kind of a derail, and we had to focus on something else because of this disturbances. Other than that, subsequent IMF negotiation, I don't think there was a delay because of that situation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Governor and everyone. My 2 questions. One is with regards to, I think previously the Governor also, I asked this question from him, with regards to cryptocurrency and how that can be, if any, positive effect on the economy if it can be integrated with the current crisis. Can cryptocurrency be a possible accessory in coming out of this crisis? One, and what is your standpoint? Because we saw the previous governor who did not wish to comment as much on cryptocurrency, and also we saw the previous Minister of Sports and Youth in favor of it. So we saw a few collisions there. That's the first question on cryptocurrency. Second one, we saw the foreign note holdings of people that was reduced from $15,000 to, in notes of course, to $10,000. How is this practically going to be implemented is my second question.
First question, I think as any central bank around the world, we at the central bank do not recognize cryptocurrency as we don't recognize that. I mean, if you listen to even the major central banks, none of the central bank has recognized this as a kind of a activity that as a central bank we do not recognize that. That's a simple answer for that. And on the limit on the bringing down the, if you can remember, this US dollar 10,000 is the limit worldwide. If you go to any other country, what you can take in currencies limited to 10,000 US dollars. But in our case, for whatever reason, that was increased to 15,000. But now we are going to bring it down to 10,000, and also we giving anyone who basically is holding more than say 10,000 or 15,000 or even more than that, we are giving them opportunity to come and deposit this currency in a banking system so that they can get the advantage of this, whatever the currency value and also the rupee value, whatever. So that is, it's not that immediately we are bringing down, we give them a period so that people can bring and convert and deposit that money into the banking system. This is because, you know, when you look at from the monetary policy point of view, because Sri Lanka is not a dollarized country and we don't want to go in that direction, and rupee is the legal tender in this country, and all the transactions technically or legally will have to happen in local legal tender, that's with rupees. So because of this several other reasons, there was a tendency to people to transact in tendency to do in real level or these dollar transactions. So we don't want to encourage that. So then our monetary policy will not be effective if countries dollarize. That's why I think we don't want to encourage that. So that's why we are giving opportunity for people who are holding dollars. Please come and deposit in the banking system. That will certainly help in this kind of situation. That dollars can, if you look at the students who are basically going abroad for studies, are struggling to at least buy dollars from the banking system. At least if that dollars currency is at least coming to banking system, then banks can help all these small transaction students who are going abroad to provide with the dollars at least for them to go abroad with them for their educational purposes. I think that is a much better course than holding into dollars and keep it in under mattresses at homes. I know a lot of people, I was told, been doing that. I mean, this is an opportunity, and also they can earn better return. And cost of holding dollars is going to be, we will make it much more costly if they hold on to currencies.
On that note of not hiding your currency under mattresses, I'd like to wind up today's session. Thank you, Dr. Weerasinghe, for a very interesting presentation on the health of the economy and what the central bank is doing and what the government is also doing in trying to take us through this crisis. And for answering all the questions that came from the audience, I'm sorry, I think we are holding you up. You have another urgent meeting in a few minutes. And thank you once again to the audience for their presence and for their questions. And with that, we will wind up for tea and refreshments.